Okay, next up, what we're going to do is look at another method of doing this. So the first method was to produce this, right? We still have our physical sky. It's out in the context model. And I had to scale the whole thing down quite a bit to make the model like 3 inches wide in order to get the same camera settings that you're seeing here. The other alternative is a little different. I mean, you can scale the entire site model down if you like, or you could scale just the building down and study it like a building model, like what you've got sitting on your desks out here, right? Like some of the stuff you do in design is just the building. So I'm going to show you sort of both of those situations. So basically, the first one would be, and I'm not going to fully render this one because it's up to you to decide if you want to, but you could select the whole thing, and what I would suggest is select it, group it, and then you can make a copy of that group, right, and then scale it down. So if you're going to scale it down like that, what I would suggest is pick the reference model you want, and then how big you want it to be relative to, you know, what your intuitive understanding is of the camera controls. So for me, when it comes to this kind of stuff, I don't really want the building in my digital environment to be any more than like 6 inches wide, just because those are the settings I'm familiar with, and it doesn't matter, I guess, once you calibrate it properly. So I'm going to scale this to 6 inches. It creates this tiny little thing that I'm going to move back into my model space over here. Okay, and basically what I'm doing is I'm moving it into that little photography studio that we talked about in class last week. So there are a couple other things that need to happen for this to look all right. You probably want to model it in such a way that it's creating like a somewhat realistic and understandable environment. So I like to create little pedestals that are just a hair, just a hair bigger than the actual model itself, something like this. They can both go a little higher. Sometimes if you like it to have less background influence. But then you probably want to do a couple other things too. I like to take, let me ungroup this. I like to take kind of my background piece and just extrude that down so that it doesn't really feel like it's floating. These are the small things that I think if you pay attention to them, it's really going to help you. It's really going to help you kind of get that degree of believability into your model that otherwise you wouldn't be able to achieve. So that's really all it is for scaling down the full size model. And we're going to set up cameras with the next one, but I mean, keep this in mind that you can do this with either type of model. So let me just grab this again. And I'm going to group it and then slide it off to the side. Okay, the other thing is just doing the building itself. So that part, you can do it however you want to. I'm going to ungroup this. Get rid of all that stuff. Group it. Copy it. Oops. Don't want that. And then you can do the same kind of scale factor that you're looking at. So I'm going to scale this down, this to this, and actually I'm going to make it a little larger at like 8 inches. Grab that corner, drop it on that corner. Okay, so with a model this size, you can do a bunch of things. You can you can create like a separate pedestal for it. You can create, you can make it larger if you wanted it to have less effect, or you can make it smaller if you wanted it to have more effect. But the reason I set the size of this thing is because I like to do them very small. It gives me a lot of control over the camera. So I'll just take this pedestal and make it somewhat relatable to the building itself. Oops. Okay, so once you kind of zoom in there, compared to the full-size model that I scaled down, which pretty much filled up a lot of that space, this is a rather small model. But if you were to put like a human being next to this thing, let's take a look at, let's do something like this. So let's do at 1 foot, comma 2.5 feet, and then we're going to say 6 feet tall. So a human being in this space is about that tall. So it's a little smaller than the scale. It's a little smaller than the scale that you would probably build in your actual studio. Like that is not necessarily an 8-inch model, right? That's probably what, 12 or 14 inches? 12 inches?
Yes.
Yeah.
8.5 by 11.
Okay, 8.5 by 11, right? So you know, it's not beyond the realm of possibility. So it's going to give us a pretty good sort of camera control. I don't think you guys have any questions with that, right? So I can move right into the camera and light stuff. Okay, so what I wanted to just highlight, I guess, is this again. So when you're setting this up, you need to think about what types of lights you're actually going to create. And I want to be very careful about how I present this. So remember, we were talking about photography studios. Photography studios have a series of different lights. They have spotlights for accents. They have wash lights to kind of like, you know, bleed and create background lighting, or to, you know, just increase the diffuse lighting in the space, the ambient lighting. So that's what we're going to emulate. If you look at this photography studio, you'll see some spotlights, you'll see some, you know, background lights, some wash lights, right? These are all creating ambient light. You have an omni light here, right? A globe light that's just bouncing light from everywhere, so it's not directional. So all of these things are exactly what we've been doing in the modeling environment, and now we get to use them the same way we would use them in a photography studio. So I'm not going to do all of those types of lights. I'm really going to focus on just, you know, kind of some simple accent lights and stuff. So I'm going to probably use a lot of the surface and planar lights, and then I may actually just use one spotlight. So remember, when you're looking at this particular diagram, you want omni lights to be used on surface and planar lights, and you want spotlights to be used on Rhino light families. Rhino light families will allow you to control the tilt angle and the cone angle of that light. So that's how you get things that can actually shine in certain directions rather than just shining straight down on the ground. Okay, you guys remember that lesson? Okay, so let's set a few of them up. And they don't need to be big. You can make them big if you want, but they don't need to be. So I'm going to just do, I'll just do a little cube. Something like this. So if you explode a cube, you'll get a bunch of surfaces that you can already start to work with. I'm going to get rid of this one. So I've got one here. I'll get rid of that and that, right? So I've already got 3 that I think are pretty key that I can just start warping around and rotating them so that they shine on the model itself. This one, I think I'm gonna shine from above. There we go. Okay, but these don't really need to be in any particular position, right? So you're gonna use them for accents of certain types. So I'm gonna do sort of a low kind of horizon light that has like an accent, almost like a cool morning sort of like bluish light. And then I'm going to have a white omni light that's shining from the top. And then I'm going to have a warm light on the left-hand side that kind of brightens it up and creates sort of like a washing sensation on one side with a sort of dull dimming sensation on the other side. That's the goal. So that's why I set those 3 up. So in order to accomplish that, I need to set up all 3 of those light families and materials. So I'm going to create 3 layers. I'm going to call this Studio. We'll just call it Studio White, Studio Warm, and Studio Cool. Not a single one of those did I format exactly the same. So Studio White, let's just make it like a gray. Well, we could just make it white. Studio Warm, I'll make it goldish. Studio Cool, I'll make it like a cyan color. So this one's going to be Studio Cool. This was Studio White. And this one was Studio Warm. All right. So remember, when we scaled down the original render that we did, we actually had, what was I going to say? Oh, right. We had to reduce the amount of wattage that we were working with on our lights. It's a little bit easier to work with the wattage of your lights when you just kind of calibrate them that way already, because the efficacy is affected. So some of you experienced like the spreading of like light particles in your image. That's an efficacy issue. So you need a little bit less efficacy along with less wattage when you're reducing the scale of the model. So anyway, I'm going to create 3 of these. I'm going to take the emitter cove exterior. No, actually that was too warm. I'm going to take emitter spot 8. Whoops, that's not what I wanted. I wanted clone. Let's go to clone. I'm going to call this Studio White. And this one, we need to be careful about how we're looking at it. So this is an emitter 2 meters. How far is 2 meters in feet?
6 feet.
6 feet, right. And if you're looking at this, right, that's already 3 feet, and it's totally burnt out with light. So we need something that's going to wash it much more softly than what you're seeing in the 2 meter preview, because it's burning it out even 3 feet away from the model, which is, if you look at what we've got here, this light is, grab this corner to there. Wow, that's 8 feet. That's surprising. That needs to be closer. I'll probably have to scale these things down a little bit. Yeah, okay, that should do it. Alright, I'll fix that later. Let's pull this way. Yeah, that should do it. Okay. So let's reduce the watts to something like 100. Well, no, let's do 200. And let's reduce the efficacy to 50. That should work. I have it on pure white. That's kind of what I was looking for. And then you can close that. So this is Studio White. That was Studio White, right? Yeah, 100. Efficacy I reduced to 50. There we go. There. So now you see that drastically changed the preview. So it's really just like a soft light, and it's ever so slightly lighting it up from about 3 feet away. If we need to bump this up, we can. We could probably bump it up to like 150, and I think that might be a little more appropriate, actually. So anyway, that's a soft wash light I'm going to have above it. So I'm going to duplicate this. This one's going to be Studio Warm. I'm going to turn this off and make it a warmer color. So it's going to have a little bit of yellowish to it. Probably something more like that. Yeah, there we go. And this one, I think I want it to be a little bit more powerful, so I'm going to switch it to 200 watts and 75 efficacy. Okay, so that one's going to wash it a little bit more heavily. And then I will duplicate that. And this one will be Studio Cool. And this one I'm actually going to make very cool. There we go. And I think I'm going to go with something like 150 and 50 again, so that it's just a very soft, kind of subtle washing of a blue light from the background. Okay, so let's apply this to each of those materials. I will do select objects, and then I'm going to take this one and assign it to that. And then I'm going to make sure you're hitting escape in between two, because select objects will select them both. Studio warm will get that. And then Studio Cool will get this one. And let me just set up a quick camera angle. You can, with these things, you can kind of look at it in sort of a studio-esque condition if you're really trying to get into it that way. So I'm going to actually leave my pedestal visible on this one, and this is just a little draft render. The lights that I have assigned to this model are still there. So if you wanted to, you could make some adjustments to that, and you probably should. I'm going to leave them there for now and just mess with them just because, in the interest of time. So let me do a draft render. I'll pause while it gets up for a couple minutes, and then we'll take a look at it together. So guys, just a point of clarification, make sure that you double check that the lights are shining the right direction. So because I did that cube thing, all the faces that I'm working with were actually facing outward. So when you explode it, these are all, well, the top one's facing down, which is fine, but the other two are facing the opposite direction. So you got to flip those in. Flip all, good. So now they're all shining in, and I think this one actually wants to be a little bit closer. So let's get back into this thing like this, and let's do another render. That's what it started doing, but we didn't have our other lights. And I will make modifications to the other lights as well. They're way too powerful, the ones that are on the model itself. But we can at least get to a draft render point just by going on this train. So this one needs to be a white 1. That's a 2. Probably should be more intense. The warm light isn't really doing anything. Neither of those are. Alright, let me bump up the lights. They're not really doing as much as I thought they would. Hang on. Just real quick, I'll go over, and I'm recording this part too. I'll go over what I did. It's not perfect yet. I still have some adjusting. But I did increase all the efficacies and wattages of these lights in order to get them to react. I think the Studio Warm light probably needs to be replaced with a spotlight. And the Studio Cool light I think is okay, but the Studio White light is a little bit kind of overwhelming to it. So I'm going to replace the Studio Warm light with a spotlight. That's really key. And other than that, I left these the same. I changed I added a focal distance, and I just clicked on this corner right here, and I changed the f-stop down to 15. So hopefully that'll give me a little bit of blurriness on the back edge of the material that you see as the base pedestal. And it's set to constant dome without sun. I think that's about it. So let me let this run for a few, and then we'll take a look at it together.